No, you're applying every tool in the toolkit, and yet you just told us they are moving forward.
Well, they're moving forward in terms of the capacity to break out in producing fissile material.
Yeah.
We're looking very carefully at anything they might be doing on weaponization. But it's important here as well to make sure that in doing this, we're acting in close concert with partners in Europe, in the region. And we've built that kind of approach in ways that we didn't have a few years ago.
Ukraine. I'll start with the cause for hope. NATO has recently expanded military support. A lot of the ammunition shortages have been addressed. Dozens of F-16 fighter jets are on their way to Ukraine. They're expected to be operational this summer. How do you ensure that U.S. aid to Ukraine continues if there is a change in the White House? Or to put it more bluntly, how do you Trump-proof aid to Ukraine?
Well, I think it's important to note two things. First, and it's always important to start here, Vladimir Putin's already failed. He's failed in the objective he set, which was to erase Ukraine from the map, to end its existence as an independent state, to subsume it into a greater Russia. That has failed, and it cannot succeed. Now, the measure of success for Ukraine, given Russia's failure, and of course, so many other losses that came with that, the fact that for Russia now, it's lost its energy market in Europe, it's facing a NATO that is stronger and larger than it's ever been, and no one could have imagined 3 years ago that Finland and Sweden would become members of NATO. Across the board, virtually everything is a strategic matter that Putin has sought to prevent. He's precipitated by his actions. The question now is, what constitutes success for Ukraine going forward? And I think the answer is straightforward. It's a Ukraine that is strong, that's independent, that's increasingly integrated with the West, and that stands on its own feet, militarily, economically, democratically. And we have Ukraine on that trajectory, even as we're working to do everything we can to make sure that it has what it needs to deal with the ongoing Russian aggression. We're also helping Ukraine build this plan, program for the future. Now, a lot has already gone into that, and yes, it will continue to need resources. But I think if people look at the logic of this, we've seen a strong bipartisan majority in both houses of Congress for supporting Ukraine. I believe that support is still there. Any administration, I think, will take account of that. And any administration has to ask hard questions. If we stop, if we reverse ourselves, if we let Ukraine down, what will Putin do? He will then really resume the aggression and possibly have a chance of succeeding where, for now, he's failed. He won't stop at Ukraine. He's likely to go at other countries in the region, including NATO allies and other would-be aggressors far afield from Ukraine, far afield from Europe. They're taking lessons from this too.
My question again, is there anything you can do to try to lock in now, in July 2024, to ensure that the U.S. continues to honor the obligations and commitments it has made, no matter who is running things a year from now?
So we've done a number of things. And look, every administration has an opportunity, of course, to set its own policies. We can't lock in the future. But just a week ago, at the NATO summit, we had more than 20 countries come together on the margins of the summit to announce that they had negotiated and signed 10-year bilateral security agreements with Ukraine. And that means that all of these countries, including the United States, have committed to help Ukraine for the next decade, build up its deterrent capacity, build up its defenses. Now, if we were to renege on that, I suppose that's possible. But happily, we have another 20-some-odd countries, and we're heading to more than 30 that will be doing the same thing. These are long-term commitments to Ukraine.
I want to ask about what it would take for the U.S. to change its policy on how far Ukraine can shoot weapons into Russia. And I'm drawing for that question, I reached out to colleagues in our Kyiv bureau, including Ukrainian colleagues. I was curious what they would want to ask you. They want to know, does Washington want Ukraine to win or not?
I think if you look at the last 2.5 years, it's hard to conclude that anyone has done more for Ukraine to assure its success than the United States of America. And that will continue for as long as we have anything to say about it. Now,
that is true, but they would point out they're being asked to fight with one hand tied behind their back?
Every step along the way, we've tried to make sure that we're adapting and adjusting to the realities on the ground, to what's actually happening, to make sure that Ukrainians have what they need when they need it. But often it's not as simple as it seems. Let me give you an example. At various points during these last 2.5 years, one weapon system or another has made its way into the headlines. Maybe it's F-16s, which, as you noted, are in the process of being delivered. Maybe it's an Abrams tank, some other system. And there seems to be this binary question, oh, we give it to them or we don't. But it's not as simple as that. It's not enough to give them a weapon system. They have to be able to use it. They have to be able to maintain it. It has to be part of a cohesive strategy. And so as we've done these things, and Lloyd Austin has done an extraordinary job bringing together more than 50 countries in support of Ukraine's defense, but also working through each of these decisions. And again, every step along the way, as necessary, we've done more, we've adjusted, we've adapted, and I'm convinced we'll continue to do that.
So on this specific question of Ukraine's ability to use the weapons it is being given to actually attack the enemy that is attacking them, it sounds like that is a conversation that is ongoing?
There's always an ongoing conversation.
Yeah. Okay. Why not make crystal clear Ukraine has a place in NATO? Ukraine will get membership in NATO, put some kind of timeline on it, a year, 2 years, 5 years, I don't know. But just to make clear to Vladimir Putin, we're calling your bluff.
We have made that crystal clear. That's exactly what the last two NATO summit declarations say. Vilnius, Ukraine will become a member of NATO when conditions allow, when all the members agree. In this summit, we've talked about the irreversibility of Ukraine's path to NATO. And more than that, I think it's easy to look at the language in a summit declaration and maybe harder to understand what's actually happening in a practical way. We were really determined with this summit to build a bridge to Ukraine's NATO membership because, again, you have to do this in a deliberate, methodical way to make sure that any country coming in is prepared to assume the responsibilities of membership, contributes fully to the alliance, and meets the various requirements. So this last summit really put in place a bridge for Ukraine to go across. For the first time ever, we've stood up a dedicated NATO command whose purpose is basically to help Ukraine cross that bridge. We've never done that before. So I think the direction is clear. And if you're in Moscow... The
timeline is TBD, but after the war ends?
The timeline is based on meeting the various requirements, but I'm convinced that what we put in place will help Ukraine do that quickly.
I want to ask about Americans detained in Russia, including Evan Gershkovich of the Wall Street Journal, who was sentenced this morning to 16 years in prison. Also, Vladimir Karamurza, who was awarded the Pulitzer Prize this year for his columns for the Washington Post. How do we bring them home?
I think you had Roger Carstens here a couple of days ago. Roger, his team, every single day are working to bring unjustly detained Americans home wherever they're held. And of course, when it comes to Evan, when it comes to Paul Whelan in Russia, other Americans, we're working it quite literally every day, looking to see what we can do to get them home. We've had a rather extraordinary track record over the last 3.5 years of doing just that, bringing some 30 Americans home from different places around the world where they were being unjustly detained. All I can tell you is this, we're working it. We're working it as we speak, and we're not going to stop until we get Evan home, we get Paul Whelan home, until we get others home.
Understanding and appreciating that you would not want to get into any details in a public forum of negotiations that may be underway. Is Putin, and many other bad actors in the world, but let's stick with Putin, is he just waiting out Biden? Like, why would he cut a deal on Evan Gershkovich now when it's such a huge bargaining chip for him with the next administration?
Well, you're right. I'm not going to get into the details. Look, any effort to bring any American home is going to be part of a process of back and forth, of discussion, potentially of negotiation. And depending on what the other side is looking for, they'll reach their own conclusions about whether it meets whatever their needs are, and we can bring someone home. And I don't think that's dependent on an election in the United States or anywhere else.
Okay. You talked about how Russia, in your view, has already lost, that they're facing a bigger, stronger NATO than 3 years ago. Are U.S. sanctions, are Western sanctions on Russia working? And can you name for us a single example of where they have prompted Vladimir Putin to behave better?
I think we make a mistake if we look at the question of whether a sanction has succeeded solely on the question of has it immediately changed behavior. Because what we know is this: the sanctions that we've been able to impose, and not just us, dozens of countries around the world in an extraordinary coordinated effort that actually started before the Russian invasion of Ukraine. When we saw it coming, we got prepared. We brought countries together. We planned out what we were going to do. And in all the months since, we have added collectively to the pressure on Russia. But what does that mean in practice? It means that everything that so many countries around the world can do easily, it's much harder for them to do. Everything that we can do cheaply, it's much more costly for them to do. And this has a growing, powerful weight on Russia's economy and on Russia's future. You have a combination of sanctions, export controls, a brain drain from Russia. At one point, more than 1 million people had left. Some have gone back, but the ones who have left tend to be the best and the brightest who are contributing to Russia's future. Its ability to move forward with critical industries, whether it's defense aerospace, whether it's energy exploration, all of those have a heavier and heavier weight on them. Now, it's also true the Russians have found workarounds, and particularly in their relationship with North Korea, with Iran, and unfortunately with China. They have found ways to keep the defense industrial base moving so that they can continue to prosecute the aggression against Ukraine. But as I'm looking at it, as I'm looking at Russia's future, if this weight remains imposed on them, that future is harder and darker, and that's not what we want, and it was certainly not what we wanted when we started, but it's a reality that they have imposed upon themselves.
Yeah. How are you thinking about